Hello, and welcome to It's an Artful Life. I'm your host, Jillian Rhodes. This project started with a question: do the arts matter anymore? I decided to start asking people that very question and came up with this project, an experiment on how and if people see and experience the arts in their daily lives. Is it an artful life? Let's find out. I'd enjoy art, but it's too intellectual and I don't understand it. Unfortunately, I hear this a lot from people who might be interested in the art world but feel excluded by it. Modern art especially seems to take pride in how exclusive it is, and it's often seen as navel-gazing and narcissistic. It's a bit similar as well to the general stereotype that art, and therefore artists, are more or less impractical, and artists impractical people, people whose artistic nature seems incomprehensible and even overly dramatic to the quote-unquote normal people. Whatever the reality may or may not be, this view is pretty widespread, and it is, along with the challenges of dealing with the modern art world and how it affects the views of the art world, is at the forefront of today's interview. So,
Right.
to start off with, could you just introduce yourself briefly?
Sure. Yeah, so my name is Ryan Cole. I'm originally from the U.S., from the Dallas area of Texas, actually. And I've been living abroad in Europe for, Jesus, I think 10 years now. So 2 years in Amsterdam and then 8 years in Prague, which is where I am currently. I trained actually as a graphic designer, so I actually have kind of a arts background. And I've worked as a designer and kind of more, these days I'm doing more kind of programming, and working in tech. But I've also taught design and, had my own design studio and that kind of stuff. So lots of stuff.
Okay, cool. So these days you said you're working kind of in the tech industry.
hmm
Okay, nice. But you said you came from an arts background. So do you think or do you consider yourself an artistic person?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I don't know. For me, it's kind of being a graphic designer. I don't know. I've sort of been conditioned, I guess, to have a little bit of a like skeptical, eye rolly, like feeling about like the arts whenever like the arts in quotes. Um, I definitely have like a good number of like actual artist friends and kind of knowing the way that they think and the way that I think. I would definitely say that I'm not like a pure artist. I'm much more of kind of like a problem solving, creative type. But I also like make music and stuff, which I think is definitely more in the vein of, kind of pure art. So it's hard to say like if I would say I'm a artistic person, but I would definitely say I'm a creative person.
Okay, interesting. A lot of people seem to make that distinction that I've talked to. I just want to briefly ask. I think it was you made an interesting point that the pure artists think in a different way. Did you have something in mind when you said that? How do you think pure artists think differently?
Well, I think there's definitely kind of, I don't know if it's like something which is inherent in being kind of an artist in 2017, but there's definitely kind of a layer of impracticability. I don't know if that's the correct word, but a lot of my friends who are like actual artists, they have like a very kind of eccentric way of looking at the world. Um, and and I would argue that a lot of times kind of contrary to like the reality of the world. And a lot of times kind of making their own lives like a little bit more difficult, I think, than they really need to be.
Interesting.
But it somehow goes together with the persona.
Well, yeah, it's interesting. I think that that's actually probably something that a lot of people consider with artists is that they're kind of impractical.
Right, right, right.
Um, But so you mentioned that you make music and you had this arts background. So kind of what drives you to the arts? What kind of interests you about the arts?
Uh, I don't know. I mean, I kind of have like a really mixed relationship with fine art, I would say. Because there's definitely some like fine art which I really appreciate, and there's a lot of it which I think is kind of a product of the way the art world has kind of coalesced into like a marketplace.
Hmm.
I guess it's probably always been like that, but there's definitely a lot of fine art which I think is kind of objectively useless in the world.
Hmm.
um, uh, but which kind of gets a value attached to it. Like when I was in college, I used to work at the Modern in Fort Worth, which is like a really known modern art museum.
Yeah.
And a lot of the other people I worked with were artists or aspiring artists, painters, this kind of thing. And uh, so we got to see like all the exhibitions come through, and we got to like hear the curator talking about the work that was being displayed. And just so much of that stuff, I think, kind of the postmodern fine art world, it kind of disappeared into its own belly button at a certain point, and it just became really inaccessible to anyone without like a really deep understanding of art history or like philosophy. So that kind of art, I would say, it has this really kind of academic level of I don't know, like interaction with people, but if you're not privy to the whole kind of backstory on it, then it's essentially meaningless. So I think art in a way in the past, I think it's changed a bit in the past like 20 years, but going from like the 50s to like the 80s, it's really, becomes more and more academic and less like kind of effective at touching normal people.
Interesting. So, with kind of that in mind, do you have any particularly memorable experience with art? I mean, it can be fine art or music or anything, just like a memory that particularly stands out for you.
Yeah, that's a good question. Um, I don't know. I would say there's definitely like a few artists whose work kind of it does still work like outside of the context of kind of this academic analysis. And that's artists like Dan Flavin who does like big fluorescent light installations. Um, and even some like modern composers like a good friend of mine named George Beringer. He plays violin and he's like a composer who composes kind of modern I don't know, he calls it like experimental music. So but it's basically kind of following on the tradition of John Cage and experimental music of the last half century. But you can totally listen to this without having any idea of like its academic origins or the way that it connects with anything else in that kind of area of music history. It stands alone as something which still has emotional content and which can still like affect a person uh, without knowing about like the backstory of it.
Right.
So I would say like that kind of stuff like kind of gives me hope that there's like a new generation of artists who are kind of more interested in that rather than kind of navel gazing academic artwork.
Uh-huh.
Uh, so I'd say yeah, that's something which I think is kind of I find a bit more kind of like optimistic in the art world.
Uh, More like memorable when you see it, is it?
Yeah, definitely. And to see something which is considered, high art, which still has kind of like emotional effectiveness is really, is nice to see.
Yeah. So, you talked a lot so far about kind of the intellectual problems of modern art, which is, I think, a valid, you know, perspective. I mean, I think a lot of people share it, especially. But I kind of want to talk about now daily experience of art. So do you think that you experience art on a daily basis? Like, is there art around you right now, or when you're walking to work or in your office or that kind of stuff?
Um, yeah, I would say visual art, not so much. Like, I don't know, Prague is a kind of a funny city. It has this really medieval atmosphere. Like you just walk through the city and it's like, it could be 1310 or something, and it wouldn't take too much imagination to imagine that. But at the same time, like, there's not really like a lot of activity here that you see, like in Germany or the Netherlands, for instance, like, really interesting graffiti or street art or that kind of thing, is really pretty crappy here.
I
Um,
see.
so, so there's really not so much of like a modern overlay of visual art. But I would definitely say that I'm pretty much like immersed in music a lot. And that's, I would say like music has like a lot more kind of, like effect for me than visual art does. And that's probably just kind of like a side effect of my circumstance.
Well, I mean, I think music is perfectly valid as an art
Right.
form. It's when we talk about art, it doesn't necessarily mean something you find in a museum. I
Right.
think.
Yeah, yeah, definitely, definitely. Yeah, so I'd say music for me is definitely like kind of the more like the most lively art form that I'm in contact with regularly.
Okay, so I have a few thought experiments to sort of take you through. It's kind of the my theoretical version part of the interview.
Hmm.
So let's kind of just, if you were to imagine a world in which all of that art, intellectual or otherwise, didn't exist. What do you think it would look like? What would we be like? What would your life be like specifically? Or, kind of just kind of take that, imagine that kind of universe.
Right. Yeah, I mean that kind of implies a lot of things.
Well, yeah.
I mean, I think if you assume that, modern art never happened, essentially, that art never kind of broke free from its formal representation, which is kind of like what modern art did. It meant that when you look at a painting, it's not about the way the paint is put on the canvas. It's about kind of the action or the performance or the concept that went into like creating something. So if, like Andy Warhol didn't actually even create a lot of his artwork. So if we imagine that whole notion never happened, I think really it would kind of also imply that a lot of social changes never took place. I think a lot of that stuff was kind of like a side effect of a lot of the like social upheavals in the mid-century of the last century. And going back, I guess even before that, kind of people thinking more about the way their world is perceived, and not so much based in reality, but also kind of uh, understanding that your mental perception is really important in the way that you see the world. So if we assume that like none of that happened, then we're probably still living in like Victorian England, where things are extremely formalized, and uh, the human mind is not very well understood, and this kind of thing. So it'd probably be quite a more primitive place, I think. I think artwork, which is more about what's happening in your mind than what's happening on the medium, it gives you like a kind of a way to think about the way your mind works in combination with like what you're seeing or what you're hearing. But I think it brings like definitely like a valuable dimension to life.
It's interesting. I've never had someone be quite so specifically historical about their answer. That's really, I hadn't thought about it, specifically in the sort of modern art gaze before. So it's really interesting to hear that perspective. So I guess honestly, the next question is a bit about what you were talking about modern art today, which is if you still have all this art around you, you still have the music, the visual arts, but you're unable to experience it as art or get anything from it or have some sort of emotional reaction to it.
Right.
What kind of would that be like?
Um, it would probably be like what it's like to live with the internet in 2017. Like I feel like there's some kind of version of that already happening in a way, just from pure like oversaturation with stimulus. I mean, 20 years ago to see art, you would have to like go out of your way and pick up a book or, go to a museum or something like that. But it's, now, I mean, if you scroll through the first couple pages of Reddit, it's, there's lots of visual stuff there. So I feel in a way kind of like, desensitized.
So almost in some ways, like we're not seeing art for art anymore. Is that kind of what you're saying?
No, it's kind of, which I
Like
think
there's
is
too
really,
much.
yeah, and you become sensitized only to novelty. And I think most people are really not, they don't have the focus anymore to really kind of go deeply into a piece of music or a piece of art. I mean, of course, some people do, but the days of, you know, taking your money down to the record store and buying a CD or something and then going home and sitting in a chair and putting the music on and listening to it. I mean, that's totally gone. I mean,
Right,
now
but
you can
see,
just you like open up Spotify and I'm a fender myself, but jumping through 15 albums before like settling on something to listen to.
right. But do you think that because of that, it means that we're unable to feel something from it? I mean, there's all these things at our fingertips.
Right?
Does it remove our ability to sort of truly experience it, or does it just give us more options to find something that we can connect to? What do you think?
Yeah, kind of both of those. Like, I mean, it definitely gives you more options and you can definitely find something that you like, for sure. But I mean, it doesn't remove your ability to have some kind of emotional connection with something, but I think it definitely kind of deadens it. It kind of removes like this, a little bit of that kind of psychological feeling of value that you have attached to something. If you just like click and you're listening to something, um, I don't know, it kind of removes some kind of psychological thing there. Like if a band released a new CD and it was getting a lot of hype, then you like, oh, I got to go out on my lunch break today and like walk down to the record store and buy it and like listen to it. Then it's, you're sort of building anticipation the whole time that you don't have it yet. Whereas, it's like, oh, Beyonce released a new CD, so it's like, I'm just gonna like, I'm in the subway and I'm just gonna like pop over and like listen to it real quick. And like, it's instantaneous and there's no opportunity to kind of build up anticipation for something.
Huh. So, the last question is kind of building off that, which is how do you think? What do you think it means to live an artful life for yourself? Could be for your own life. For people, millennials or just people in general in this internet world. But just kind of, if you could offer some thoughts on what an artful life might look like in 2017.
Right, right. I mean, honestly, especially now, I think, I think it means in a lot of ways kind of just disconnecting, and creating the space in your own head to actually kind of think deeply about things or to appreciate something in like a deeper level without lots of distractions. So if that means, like something I've started doing kind of in the past couple months, If I find an album that I really like, during the day while I'm working or something, I'll kind of intentionally like not listen to it yet, and then save it for like on the weekend if I'm walking my dog or something, where I can just put headphones on and go to the park and listen to it completely uninterrupted. I find that I really enjoy music a lot more in that context. Then if I try to kind of, multitask and listen to things while I'm doing something else or, amongst the hubbub of everyday life, to kind of actually just make that space, where you're focusing on just kind of one thing at a time.
Yeah. So it's almost like, living an artful life is being intentional about it in some ways.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's almost like a meditation practice if you want to think of it that way. But, kind of, but, yeah, just giving yourself space to, really kind of like absorb something.
Wow. Okay. Well, cool. That's all the questions I have, but thank you so much for
Cool.
being part
Sure.
of this.
Definitely. Yeah. Thanks for inviting me.
It's an Artful Life will return next week with another interview. Thanks for listening.